back on the biggest upset of the college football weekend with Angelique Chingelis. She covers the Michigan Wolverines for the Detroit News. You can follow Angelique on Twitter at Chingelis. And Angelique, first off, hope you are well. Hope you and your family are safe and doing okay during these times. We thank you for your time. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you. I've got my mom up here from Cincinnati. So we've been weathering this, I don't want to call it a storm. It's more significant than that, but we're doing well. Thank you.
By the way, if you're a Michigan fan, you want to follow Angelique on Twitter, but just for fun, you need to follow basically the stories from her mom. The COVID stories out of mom that Angelique has shared throughout this have been hysterical. Absolutely hysterical. All right, Angelique. I did a lot of trolling Saturday afternoon to my friends in the great Mitten State where I was born and raised, and to people all across the country. And a lot of the more rational Michigan fans and alum that are friends of mine are saying things I've never heard them say. The crazies wanted Harbaugh gone. But now people that I actually consider intelligent fans are saying enough. Are you hearing those same things in and around the Ann Arbor, Detroit area?
Well, we must be communicating with the same people because, yes, I mean, from really the end of that game, my phone was, I got a lot of texts from former players and really upset, that this is year 6 and why is this happening? And no one expected a loss to Michigan State, not in Mel Tucker's first year, not after the performance they had against Rutgers. And although, to Jim Harbaugh's credit, he kept saying, look, they had 7 turnovers. That's not happening again. And Rocky Lombardi's a good quarterback, and that's not going to happen again. But it didn't happen with the turnovers, but it did happen that they upset Michigan, and now Michigan former players I've talked to are upset. And it felt a little bit like the way my phone was, the text messages I was getting, the phone calls, it felt like it was an Illinois game during the Rich Rod era, and it felt like that kind of meltdown in a sense, that people are getting fed up. But it's week 2, and I think calling for him to move on, that's a little extreme at this point, but you certainly understand where all this is coming from.
Well, Angelique, why is this happening? How did this happen again? I mean, does Jim have an answer as to why they're not consistently better?
He really doesn't, and we will be talking to him later today for the weekly news conference to see if he's come up with anything. But, I do think the sense I got is that the Michigan players probably overestimated themselves after what now looks like just an average win over Minnesota in that week 1 game. And they really underestimated this team. And, that reminded me a little bit of Appalachian State week. The coaches did tell them that week that you got to pay attention to this team. And the players were like, oh, yeah, okay, it's App State. And everybody knows what happened in that game. And this felt a little bit like that. And I think that goes back to coaching. I really do. I think you have to hang it on the coaches. Get them better prepared, get them focused, get them to understand that this is not a weakling coming in. This is your in-state rival. And, I mean, they talked the talk this week, the Michigan players last week, and they didn't follow through. And, part of it is the cornerback situation. Ambry Thomas came back for his last season. Then with the postponement, he decided to opt out. So they were weakened at that position. And if you're a smart offensive coordinator, you are going to target that aspect of Michigan's defense. And that's what Michigan State did, but, with a freshman receiver. So I think that makes it doubly the insult that it already is for Michigan fans. And finding answers, that's the biggest question. Why aren't there answers in year 6, is Harbaugh's year 6? And I think that's what's got people really frustrated at this point.
They may have said the things during the week, but when you see Milton's post-game press conference, not even knowing who a Michigan State player is, and the way Michigan State player answered, it's like, no, well, we study our opponent. We know who they are. That's the kind of arrogance when you're undefeated you can get away with. It's the kind of arrogance that I know drives Michigan fans crazy when they're losing. It's one thing to talk the talk and be a Michigan man when everything's good and that big block M means everything. But when it's going this way and they have the arrogance, the Michigan fan of the 80s and 90s gets really annoyed, don't they?
They do, and that is a big part of this. And I think that the other thing that we all wrote about last week is that this team felt, and I don't deny they feel together because of how they kept practicing during the postponement. Even after the Big Ten pulled the plug in August, Harbaugh had this team continuing every day, and other teams paused. I mean, a lot of teams in this conference paused, and Michigan didn't, and they felt good about that. They felt like, they puffed their chests out and said, no one here stopped. We kept going, and they felt a camaraderie there that I do think is genuine, but that doesn't mean you're going to win games. And they've got to find that little missing piece, because I don't think that they're far off, even though it looks like they are, especially when they have those big gap games against Ohio State. But it is about finding something that keeps them focused in a game and early in a game against a team like Michigan State that they know that they're better than, but somehow Michigan State comes through. And that doesn't happen to championship teams. That doesn't happen to good teams. And I think that that's all part of what frustrates Michigan fans and certainly former players who knew a great deal of success in their careers. And, in the past 13 years since Lloyd Carr retired, they just haven't experienced that on a consistent basis. And that continues this snowballing effect of frustration. And, and it makes other people on the outside just think, well, why is Michigan arrogant? Why do they keep touting their tradition when really the last decade and a half they've been not quite as relevant as they'd like to be?
Angelique Chengelis is kind enough to give us some minutes of her time. She covers the University of Michigan for the Detroit News. You can follow her on Twitter at Chengelis. How come they can't adopt, even for 1 year, Angelique, a chip on their shoulder? When Harbaugh came back, he kind of had it. He had it. How come he can't get his team to have it for 1 year, where just for 1 year they say, you know what, we're tired of being above average. We're tired of losing some games that we normally lose, and we're tired of it. We're just tired. I mean, it goes back to how Bo became Bo. They got their handed to him by Ohio State. He comes back the next year and he says, this is a year about basically regaining your respect. And we all know what he did when he got his shot at Ohio State. I mean, Angelique, I don't understand why for one season, not every season, because they're Michigan, but for 1 year, why Michigan can't develop a chip on their shoulder, and seemingly half of the Big Ten can.
Well, some of the players were saying that in this offseason that they had a chip on their shoulder, but there is a difference, between saying it and kind of believing it. And I'm not sure that they ever believe that. And I don't know if that's I don't know how Jim Harbaugh coaches them. I don't know how what he gets them to believe about themselves. And you go in with confidence. Is that one approach? Do you go in with a chip on your shoulder? I mean, it certainly has worked in East Lansing, and Mark D'Antonio perfected it. And it's the way I would play sports. That's the way I was raised, and that's how I approached playing athletics. And it certainly works, the us against them kind of thing. And it might be something that Michigan has to adopt, but I think it's hard for them. I don't think that's part of their DNA to feel like the underdog. But, they or the chip on their shoulder dog. And really, when you look at these last couple of years against Ohio State, since that 2016 game, and even the next year was close for, they had the lead 14-0 and then collapsed in the second half. These last couple of years have really exposed the gap between Ohio State and Michigan. And maybe that is the approach they have to take, that, no one believes in this team. No one gets this program anymore. And we have to show that they're wrong. And that is really not the way they walk into a room. That's not the approach that Michigan players take. And I don't know if that's right or wrong. And I don't know what the answer is, but clearly they're flailing, and they're looking for some way to become a consistent program. And last week shows that they're just not there yet.
Angelique, I had, the most of the Michigan fans wanted this total change. A couple of them are really, really upset with Don Brown, the D coordinator, and not really making changes. And I and saying that, it worked, but people figured it out. I was looking at the scores when they got whooped by Ohio State. in the 2018 season. That defense was really good. They'd strung all those wins together, and then they give up 62 to the Buckeyes. Is there something to that, we're dealing with it with Florida right now, that their defense isn't very good, but they just keep blitzing and keep giving up a lot of points, and people are getting frustrated that watch the Gators. I'm sensing that same thing with Michigan, particularly the way that Sparty exposed their D-backs. Will Brown change his style? Does he have to change his style? And really, what's the state of the defensive side? We can talk about Harbaugh all we want, but the guy running the defense is getting a lot of fingers pointed at him right now as well.
Well, and rightfully so, and rightfully so after that Ohio State game, and he shot back, and he believes in the style of defense and his scheme, and I guess you want your coordinator to commit to what he believes in, but you're right, he has to change at this point. You can't have these young corners exposed like that. They have to change. He's been, this is a team that he wants this defense to be man. And it's just not possible. And I think he will make adjustments this week going into the Indiana game. I got to believe that's going to stick for the rest of the season. I don't think they go all zone, but I think that he is definitely going to make that move because he has to. I mean, he's got two young corners who are just absolutely on an island and got burned by a freshman receiver and a very good quarterback. I mean, anybody who underestimated Rocky Lombardi was really making a mistake. And I kept saying that last week to anybody who would listen, that, they're not going to have these turnovers again. And they are going to be fired up to play Michigan. And but Don Brown has to change. And I think that's hard for him. He's a guy who's had this established mindset on how you play defense. And of course, that's the mindset you want. But you have to be willing to make adjustments. And that has frustrated Michigan fans, too, is, that they haven't seen those adjustments, and they seem pretty obvious to outsiders. And sometimes I think that Don Brown's a bit of a victim of being stubborn and knowing what the outside noise is saying and not wanting to relent to it. And he has to at this point because that's what the defense is making him do, because they're just not ready to fulfill the scheme the way he wants it, and he has to adjust. This is about coaching right now. And I think he will do it.
But there is no plan B, though, right? I mean, it's that movie from a few years ago, Too Big to Fail. I mean, there is, Angelique, it just seems as if there's no possible plan B, if you know what I mean. If Michigan keeps losing 3-4 games a year, that it still just seems as if this is like an arranged marriage. And unless this guy opts out of the marriage, Michigan's not going to be the one opting out.
It does feel like that. I've been having that conversation the last couple of days too, and I really do think that's how it feels. I mean, there has been no extension on his contract yet, and he and Ward said that they were working on it before the pandemic. And then they hit the pause button. I think it's also going to be very difficult to offer him an extension at the money he's making right now, coming off of this bizarre year and the money that's being lost by these athletic programs across the country, not just at Michigan, but when you're staring at $80 million losses for an athletic department, I don't know how Ward Manuel, who, by the way, his contract is up next year, he hasn't, as far as I know, his contract has not yet been renewed. So you've got some interesting different levels of this going on. I just don't know what they offer Jim Harbaugh to come back and make it reasonable for Michigan fans to say, oh, okay, that he's worth the money. And these are all these different layers that they have to sift through. And I'm not sure where it's going to go, but you're right. I think that's always been the one thought, is that maybe Jim has unfinished business. Maybe he does want to go back to the NFL. I've always thought that. I kept saying from the moment he got hired that at some point I do think he'll want to go back to the NFL. I'm not saying he does right now. I don't know what he's thinking. But with a contract that has not been extended yet, you start to wonder. And it's up after last season. Next season. And who knows how this is going to play out. But you're right. It does feel a little bit like that. And then you start, people say, well, if not Harbaugh, then who? Well, there are really good coaches out there. I mean, it's not like he's the only person who can coach Michigan. And, I think it's interesting to think about who could be next. and who Ward Manuel might look at. And I think there's an interesting pool of young talent out there. But, until they pull the plug, I guess we just have to keep watching and see what the next step is, because I'm just not sure where it's going.
Well, and Angelique, that was my question, everybody, because you're not getting Nick, you're not getting Dabo, you're not getting Kirby. Those just aren't happening. In Michigan, I think, the Michigan fan, they believe that they could just pick up the phone and anybody would run and come take the job. So I don't know. The other side of it, too, is that, if it were that easy, if you just get the coach and fix it, Texas would be a hell of a lot better than they are. So would USC. I mean, when people talk about the money that Michigan has, and I don't deny the wealth of the football program, but there are some other big boy programs that can't figure it out either. When Michigan gets one of these hot young guys to come in, it's going to do nothing but, I think, deflate the Michigan fan base.
It may. I mean, but you're right about the other, about using Texas as an example. Michigan is not the destination program it once was, that I thought people would be clamoring to come here. I just don't see it. And that's why I think you have to identify, an offensive coordinator, someone out there who wants to make this next jump and who has shown that he's innovative and can handle all the different political aspects of becoming a head coach, because there are a lot of them. And in Michigan, you have to deal with the president and the board of regents, along with all the fans. And you've got a lot of people to make happy, and that's not different than any other big time program. But Michigan does seem to be unique, and I've not heard a lot of people saying, "Oh gosh, I really want that Michigan job." You just haven't, and that's why I think that people fall back on, well, if not Harbaugh, then who? But maybe he doesn't want to do this the rest of his life. I mean, you have to consider that too. And then he's 56 years old. He's still young, and his brother's still in the NFL. And maybe he does want to at some point get back there. And then that's when Michigan has to just start really getting creative, because I don't think a lot of those big names would want to come to this program. I just don't see that happening.
Well, I never thought Jim would leave until he beat Ohio State. Because I just don't think he can have his legacy be, I went 0 against the Buckeyes. I will throw this out there, though. When the day comes, you call Matt Campbell. He'll be 40.
Yes.
He'll be 40.
What about Luke Fickell? I mean, I think that's probably reaching for someone who's probably wouldn't. I mean, he's an Ohio State guy, but he is a guy who's very successful, and he's at my alma mater. And I've been watching him a lot, and he's definitely a guy who's ready to take that next step. But
and Matt's got all those ties to Ohio also. And I do think, quite frankly, that from a recruiting standpoint, that whenever it is that they move on, they need somebody who's got a tie in, quite frankly, from a recruiting standpoint to Ohio.
It's what Antonio did to get Michigan State back where they are. I mean, that's where they won the recruiting battle. He did it in Ohio.
That's right. I mean, this is their bread and butter. I mean, the one thing when you talk to former coaches at Michigan, assistants and head coaches, I mean, they focused on obviously Michigan, Ohio, and then throw in some Illinois, some Chicago area, and that was their focus, and that's what made these teams what they were at Michigan. And they've gone national, and I get it. You've got to pluck some national talent here and there, but you have to focus on this tri-state area. And they haven't done that great lately in Michigan, getting some of the top talent. Those guys are leaving for Notre Dame and other schools, not Michigan. And that is, you're right. You have to have someone who's got some tie in to recruiting in Ohio. That's definitely something that they have to look at if there is that opportunity here coming up.
Angelique, all the best to you and to Mom. Say hi to her for us. Stay safe.
And to your alma mater. I mean, the Bearcats got it going on right now.
They do. I thought that the Luke Fickell hire was a really, really smart one, and maybe he's waiting for his chance at the Ohio State job at some point. But what he's doing at Cincinnati is really refreshing. To someone when I was in school, they were not very good. So this has been fun to watch.
Thanks as always, Angelique. We'll talk soon.
My pleasure. Thanks so much.
Angelique Chengelis, who covers the University of Michigan for the Detroit News. Follow her on Twitter at Chengelis, Chengelis. Angelique Chingelis joining us here on Miller and Moulton. Listen,
So enjoyable. I hope everybody else enjoyed that as much as I did.
Need to beat Indiana this week.
You're darn right they do. And that's
really
not a cupcake.
No, Indiana, he's done a fine job. They're a legit, top 25 team.
They are.
Yeah, they're a bottom of the top 25 team. They are. And if you're Michigan, you can't lose to them. Just simple